What brought you to Hillsdale this time?
I'm giving a speech tonight on satire, comedy. Basically just, we're in such a humorless world and we're in such a humorless state right now as a society. Why do we need to laugh? It's something we've lost as a culture, you know. I don't know, it's something where the children know better than we do. Because as a society, we've kind of decided that humor is not that important, or it should only make fun of certain things, or it's, you know, humor only has a specific place in culture. And I think it's just it's something where as a society we really need to, and as conservatives, it's something we need to reclaim, I think. You know, and as conservatives, we kind of ceded that ground. I think we ceded the culture war in a lot of ways, and we gave it up. So I don't know. I'm being too pretentious here.
No, you're okay. So why?
I tell jokes.
You talk about conservatives specifically.
Yeah.
As conservatives, we have lost that. Why?
Okay, so there's a couple of elements here. Conservatives and Christians, we tend to take ourselves very seriously because we're fighting for and defending very important things. Yeah. And as part of that, we throw the baby out with the bathwater and we say, well, then we cannot make fun of anything, or we can't make fun of ourselves, or we can't make fun of our silly hypocrisies or traditions that have come along with the very important things that we're defending. So that's an element, I think. Also, conservatives, and I come from a Protestant background, and so Protestants especially, we don't see art, and especially comedy, as an end in itself. So that's what the left has done so well, is the left wants to communicate like an existentialist worldview and all this stuff. And the way they do that is by making Frozen, you know, which you don't watch and go, oh, this is communicating an existentialist worldview. You just watch it and go, oh, my kids love this song, and they sing along, and it's just a very well done movie, very well animated, very funny, but they're communicating a worldview through it. And their primary goal in making a movie like that is to make a good movie. They just make a good movie, and their worldview happens to be a part of it. We always have to have our stuff make a point. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very bad for comedy. Like, comedy should just be funny.
So with the Babylon Bee, it seems like you are trying to make a point, or are you just trying to be funny?
A little bit of both. Like, I don't, because again, like you look at art from the left, and it does make a point. It's just that's not all it does, and that's not the primary thing it does. And so, like, when you look at something like the Babylon Bee, where it's, you know, we publish 8 articles a day, maybe 50 articles a week. You're going to have ones that are going more for a point. You're going to have ones that are more like, okay, we're trying to communicate something here. We know that most of our audience agrees with this point, and we want to give them something that they can share and say, you know, we want to give them something that they can share and go, here's what I believe, or something that just makes them not feel so alone. Like, that's another great thing that comedy does is we can laugh at something and then they go, oh, you too? Like, you're not, I'm not the only one who believes this, you know, and that's important, I think, especially for conservatives right now. Yeah. But I mean, the best comedy is, you know, we wrote one a few years back where we said that anti-wall extremist, the Kool-Aid man, leads campaign against Trump, and he's mad at Trump's wall because he likes to break down walls. And it was great because that was a great example of an article where people on the left thought we were making fun of Trump, and people on the right thought we were doing endearing satire of Trump that was maybe making fun of the left, you know, for being so opposed to his wall. Yeah. So it was something where you had thousands of people sharing it on both sides of the aisle, and it diffuses the tension around the conversation. It makes people laugh. Maybe it does communicate something in there or in the article. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I don't really care. It made people laugh, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I think when we look at the kind of satire we do, some jokes are going to get people laughing. They're pacing jokes. They don't necessarily need to make a point. And then when we do make the point, they're already disarmed. They're already laughing, you know? So they're much more willing to listen to your point of view at that point, I think.
You mentioned 8 articles a day, about 50 a week.
Yeah.
What are some of, that's a lot to produce. What are some of your favorites that you have produced?
Yeah, the thing is, it's like, I'm always thinking about the next joke. So every time a comedian writes a joke, you think it's your last one you're ever going to come up with in your life, you know? You go, that's it, that's all I've got. I remember about a few months into the life of the bee, I wrote an article and I was struggling to come up with another one, and I thought, well, that's it. Like, I'm out of juice. I got nothing else, you know? And I've been saying that every day for 5 years, you know? So that's, the comedian is always thinking about the next joke. Like, what's the next thing I can do? You're always looking at situations in that way. I mean, if I were to pick out some favorites, like we wrote the one during the pandemic, we wrote celebrities spell out we're all in this together with their yachts. And we had this like beautiful Photoshop of all of the yachts and the boats, and it got fact checked. People thought it was real, and we made fun of that was a fun one because we made fun of Patton Oswalt in it, and because he had made some comment about the poor people, basically making fun of people for being unemployed during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And he didn't realize how insensitive he was sounding. So we put a small joke about him in the article, and then he shared it, and he goes, "This is pretty funny, I gotta admit." But he made fun of me, but I appreciate it. And we didn't even know that he knew who we were,
That's right.
And that's a good example of something where you can make fun of somebody and they're disarmed in some way, right? Like they're laughing and they understand that it's not done in this super mean way, At least good comedy is, I think.
It's like we were talking earlier about how it humanizes people. And so I think it brings people together because, it's taking everybody down. Good comedy, it's taking everybody down, and so it's kind of leveling the playing field.
Right, good comedy deconstructs, not always, like there's obviously different kinds of jokes, but good comedy deconstructs like systems, right? So you make fun of the political process. We'll make jokes that make fun of Democrats and Republicans in one headline. We did a joke saying that Congress is going to have barcodes printed on their heads so that lobbyists can just self-checkout. They can just scan them and do self-checkout. And it's something where both people can enjoy that. Everybody can laugh at that. We had people that are close to Congress who were sharing that and laughing about it. So I think a good joke deconstructs a system, and that's an essential element of comedy too. Is that everybody's coming at things from one angle. Yeah. Even from the right, like we obviously write comedy a lot from the perspective of the right, but if we just keep parroting the same perspectives that everybody else is saying on Twitter or whatever, then it's not funny. Like no matter how clever our particular angle is, like we need to be coming at it from one of my co-writers at the Babylon Bee calls it the third angle. You have to find the third angle because everybody's doing this and this. Like if you come at it from an unexpected angle, you want people to go, "I've never thought about it that way before," and maybe you can make your point somewhere in the copy or whatever. It doesn't, if you want to make a point. Yeah. But it really should come at it from that third angle, I think, as much as you can.
And what is the idea process you go through to try to train yourself to look for that third angle every single day?
Yeah, it's tough. I wish there was a magic bullet. I wish there was, some way to just generate headlines. I actually wrote an AI script that generates Babylon Bee headlines for us, and it's really funny because it, like an AI doesn't get, it gets every element. Like I was like, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a moron, and does this stupid, puts her foot in her mouth and, whatever. Yeah. Walks off a cliff because she's a moron, but there's like an essential something missing, that it doesn't understand. So a good joke, you almost can't explain it. You have to experience it, and you have to, I always kind of say it's like you just have to glance at it and look away. There's like you can't stare at it too long, and that's part of the struggle with my job. Is like I read hundreds of headline submissions, every day, and so it's like you get numb to it after a while. So, but at the same time, that means I see so many that when one does hit you, you go, that's probably really good, But yeah, trying to put yourself in the headspace of people who are scrolling on Twitter and Facebook. And are they going to find this funny? Are they going to find it shocking? An essential element of our kind of comedy is that it looks like a news headline, right? The way that people consume news now, backing up a little bit, when the Onion used to write, when the Onion started, they were a published, satirical paper, the physical piece of paper you would go get. And the way that is consumed is very different from the way news is consumed today. So the Onion could write a headline like, "Dog barks at evil," And that's not funny on your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed. But it was very funny in the context of you're reading this satirical newspaper that has a joke about Bill Clinton and it has a joke about, George Bush or whatever. And then there's a little like local column and it says dog barks at evil and there's like a dog growling, In that context, it's very funny. In our context, people are scrolling and you really need something that is going to be a topic they're interested in. It's got to be usually got to be a current event. It's got to really jump out and they got to be, people just doom scroll nowadays on Twitter and they're like, trying to see what whatever the current event is, and they're going through and what's the most horrible news that's coming out today. And so for us, what we want to do is kind of slip in there under the cracks, and we see, and you're starting to read a headline and you're mad, you're already mad, and you're reading about how bad things are in Afghanistan or in Washington D.C. And then we have a little twist at the end of the headline that makes you laugh, and that shocking element, I think, is really what makes our kind of comedy work. So that's always what I'm looking for, is that kind of shock, at the end of it. Not shocking in a crass way or a rude way, but in a like, oh wow, that's interesting. So,
have there been headlines that have stuck out to you that you've loved and then just have not had good reception?
All the time. I mean, that's the best baseball players hit 3 out of 10, and that would be very good for a comedian to be able to write 3 out of 10, or for a comedy writer, for us to be able to write 3 out of 10 that are hits. Our very best writers, do about that. And so you're always trying to get in the headspace of where people are at, and then you publish something, and it's always obvious in hindsight. You go, oh, obviously that wouldn't have done as well as I had hoped, Yeah. I mean, the ones that don't do well that I think are hilarious are always ones that are not political, that are just making fun of something really stupid or off the wall, or they're self-referential. We're writing them from a place where we're parodying our own worldview. If we make fun of the right, they're never going to do well with our audience. But we'll still keep writing them because they're funny, and I think it's important. There's, making fun of everyday life is really important. G.K. Chesterton wrote that the problem with journalism is that it's necessarily focused on exceptions. Yeah. So he was right. So what he was saying was, journalism has to, by its nature, tell you how bad things are, and it tells you about things that are not common. So if you read the news every day, you're starting to think that everybody's dying and all this. And he says what the news doesn't do is it doesn't tell. His specific example was, the news doesn't tell you, here's all the silverware that was not stolen last night. It doesn't report on the fork that is still in your drawer in the morning. It doesn't report on the millions of marriages that are still going strong. That's not in the news. And so one fun thing about what the Babylon Bee did, what the Onion did before us, and the Wittenberg Door did before them, and what we do now is that we can look at everyday life, and we can write the article that your fork was not stolen in your drawer, that kind of thing that points people to these like everyday miracles of life. And it's like, I don't know, it really, in some ways, satirical news can give you a more accurate portrayal of the world, because we can give you the things that are not exceptions, where news has to be about death counts and this and that to freak you out,
How would you define satire?
Well, I mean, satire is a very broad range of things, and we'll talk about like what is satire, like everything from Airplane and Best in Show and Spinal Tap, and can satirize, but it can satirize a wide range of topics within, any little comedy bit you write, any little joke you write can satirize something or another. So satire is often associated with like cutting, it's a cutting tool, it's a cutting instrument. And so for me, I think of satire as a cutting instrument that helps us to separate what is important from what is not. So as we write a lot of jokes focused on the church and focused on Christianity, and making fun. What we make fun of is modern Christianity and modern evangelicalism. And we'll get people that are mad about that, like, why are you making fun of Christians so much? But what we're doing is we're not making fun of like that the Bible is important, or that the Bible is true, or that God is real, or that Jesus is real, and we should follow him, and all these things that we actually believe. What we're doing is we're making fun of the way that people implement that in their lives. Hypocrisy is a great target for satire. One of the very first articles we wrote was the first article I wrote for the Babylon Bee the day it launched was the Holy Spirit unable to move through congregation as fog machine breaks. And we actually had angry, we had watch bloggers coming after us for that one, like, how dare you make fun of the Holy Spirit? And it's like,
The fog machine.
Well, what it's doing is it's cutting away and it's saying like, hey, this, these modern elements of worship that we've incorporated into our understanding of the faith are not the core of the faith, and it helps us to cut that away. And it does it in a loving way where you're not saying, like, you don't write this like 3,000 word think piece on why fog machines are evil. You just do it in this way where people go, oh, I see what they're doing there. And people who go to churches that have fog machines and laser light shows and stuff, they can laugh at it in a way that if you were to just write this like long angry thing about it, they would not listen to you at all. So it has an interesting way of communicating a point while being funny, I think.
Do you think there's something specifically about the like cancel culture, woke culture that we have today that makes the Babylon Bee successful? Do you think it would be as successful, 20 years ago than it is now?
I mean, I don't think so. I think the Babylon Bee hit at the exact right time. I think I got this from a comedian who came on our podcast once. He pointed out this absurdity that the left controls the culture right now. They control the center of culture. They have won the culture war. The left controls so many of our institutions, and has infiltrated them and corrupted them, and now controls them. And yet they think they're oppressed. That is the fundamental division between. That is the fundamental hypocrisy in the left right now. Is that they think that they're the oppressed ones, and yet they're the power. So people talk about things in comedy like you have to punch up. Yeah. Which is you got to make fun of people in power. And so then they'll come after the Babylon Bee and say, well, you guys don't make fun of people. You make fun of the LGBTQ community. We're like, no, that's the power. That is the power right now, and that's what's so funny is that they think that they're so oppressed, but you have rich white kids growing up thinking that they're the most oppressed people on the planet, which is a very funny thing. I mean, wokeness. We just wrote a whole book on wokeness that we put together in a month because there's so much content there. Like it's almost like it's just spilling out of us because there's so much to talk about, and how do you make fun of all that? And I mean, it's a blessing and a curse. It's a double-edged sword because it's very hard to write comedy in the current year because reality is funnier than satire. Yeah. How do we stay ahead of it? At the same time, it's a target-rich environment in a lot of ways.
Speaking of reality being funnier, do you guys also have the Not the Bee, which is reality? Can you tell me how that came about?
Well, that's basically it. The news is so funny right now that you have to be constantly reminded that this is not satire, and so there's so much material out. And in a lot of ways, it's easy for them because they can just look at a headline and, obviously, like there's a lot of skill involved in like picking what to cover, and like interesting headline is really hard to write even from a real news perspective to grab people. And so they struggle with that every day, trying to like frame it in an interesting way. And what are people on the right interested in reading? But then for us, it's like we have to look at a crazy story and then go, how do we top that? How do we, I don't know, like how do you go one step further?
How did the Bee start? How did you get involved in it?
It was kind of a wild story, wild and boring at the same time. I was working a job in the construction supply industry, so very boring. And on my Facebook feed, I saw Adam Ford, who drew a Christian webcomic, and he announced, I'm launching the Babylon Bee. And in a lot of ways, it was like, why has this never existed before? And I immediately knew exactly what he was doing, and it was like, and the possibilities started flooding my mind, like there's so much we could do with this, and I wrote primarily Christian jokes at first and moved more into the political stuff as the Christian jokes dried up a little bit, but I just emailed in a joke. And he replied at the end of the day and said something like, he's like, I have read thousands and thousands of submissions today, because it was just instant. He just instantly got flooded. He's like, this was one of the only good ones. Wow. And so then he said, you can write another one if you want, and of course I'm already thinking like, I'm already out of jokes, but I sent another one the next day, and then another one the next day, and then I started writing about 3 or 4 articles a day, and I did that for 2 years, and I would just send them in the morning, and then go to my job and go about my life. And then I decided to take the leap a couple years later, and I quit my job to take over the site as editor-in-chief full-time. But yeah, it was a little bit of a cultural phenomenon just right away, in that, Adam bought a $50 web domain, and and just we started writing satire in our garages, and that was the Babylon Bee. I think it hit a cultural void.
And is there a story behind the name? Why? I mean, Babylon, I think of the Bible connotations, but why B?
That is the idea. I mean, I always tell this story, and then I started thinking about it, and I was like, I never really asked Adam why. But for me, what it means is Babylon is, I mean, that's where Israel was in exile, So for the Jews to be in exile was, I mean, imagine that life. You're God's chosen people, and you're not even in the promised land, And that's how it feels for us as Christians, especially as conservative Christians. A lot of times, like we don't feel like we're in the promised land very often. And so the idea was that we're writing dispatches from Babylon, and the B thing is great because we obviously it sounds similar. It's got the nice double B, and then it was just taken from the Sacramento Bee or any newspaper name. It sounded good. It's got a stinger, so that's nice. a little bit of sting to it, but I think originally it was going to be named something. He almost named it something very generic. It was like Christian Daily News or something. Something that was just would not have taken off.
It's not memorable.
It's not memorable, and it's not, and it was so narrow. Like you can never expand beyond that. Beyond like I'm going to tell worship leader jokes. Every day, like never being able to, and now, I mean, people will ask about the shift more into politics, and it's like, we always wanted our art to speak to the world, like good art does speak to a culture, and that's what Christian art has done for centuries, it has not just talked to Christians, it's like, it should influence culture, so for us to be able to do that, the name was an essential part of it,
Absolutely. How do you persevere? You said you've been doing it for about 5 years. You mentioned that comedy is hard.
Yeah, it's very hard.
How do you, stay strong in this culture and then having to compete every single day?
I mean, it's like I was saying before about like what my favorite joke is. It's like the next joke is always keeping you going. Like you're writing, I could throw one up right now that's going to get thousands of retweets and shares, and that's great. And then after that initial rush of like, this joke's doing well, you're always like, like what else are people talking about? Like, what else can we comment on? How can we slip in our joke and fit it around all the crazy things that are happening today? So, I mean, there's that. I also think you cannot worry too much about the reception, and like I was saying about the jokes that I like that are my favorites, they don't do well. We just started writing we created a toddler character who writes op-eds for us, and he reviews things. So he's like supposed to be kind of a pretentious critic, but he's 3, So he reviews like Cocomelon, the YouTube channel all the kids watch. He reviews ketchup, it's just. And it's never going to do that well on social media. It's never going to have the cultural influence of one of our big political headlines that comments on something. But because I love it, I don't care. You can't just write satire and go, I want to write this so that it'll get thousands of shares. I want to write this because people will agree with it. Like that's going to get tiring. And then when the likes and shares and retweets don't happen, you're going to be depressed about it. So you have to really balance it out with like, I'm going to write something that only I am going to like. I'm writing this for me. Like I'll write a joke about my wife. It's something very specific that happened with me and her, and I'm like, she's going to love this. Nobody else likes it. It gets 5 shares on Facebook. But I think that's an essential element. Like good comedy, in a lot of ways, good comedy is like an objective thing. It's just objectively funny, and I don't care if anybody else thinks so. I'm ahead of my time.
Do you take a lot of inspiration from your family and your kids?
Oh yeah, kids are so great. Just you have such a great sense of humor. You have to have a sense of humor about yourself to have. I got 3 boys, and it's like it's wild. Chesterton had a great essay on, I think it's called On Chasing After One's Hat. And he talks about how we have to see ourselves not as the star of this great drama and that we are very serious people, but we have to see ourselves as a star of a comedy. And he gives the example of a British gentleman whose hat is blown off by the wind and he chases it. And the British guy who chases his hat and is mad about it is the great butt of a joke, right? Because everyone's like laughing at him. But the one who thinks of it like I'm in a slapstick comedy right now and chases it is having a great time and has a much better outlook on life and a much better perspective. And that's So that's a phrase we use a lot at the B offices, is we're just chasing our hats, you know. Everything's going wrong, or, you know, whatever, we're not getting the shares or the clicks or whatever. It's, you know, we're chasing our hats.
They'll cut you down to size for sure.
Yeah,
all across the board.
You know, and my kids know I write comedy on the internet, and it's like I'll show them one of my videos, or I'll show them my joke, and it's like, that's not funny. And you're like, oh, okay, well.
Like, well, if you say so, I trust you. What is the greatest thing that you hope that the Bee does accomplish?
What the Babylon Bee did, and I hope continues to do, is that it created, you know, to create a brand is something that can outlast you. You know, it's like Batman, like the symbol outlasts Bruce Wayne, right? So that's kind of what I see, is that if we can kind of create this movement of like comedians that aren't afraid to tell jokes that people don't want you to hear, that can comment on the news every day. I mean, you look at The Onion as an institution, it's like The Onion has outlasted its founders and its writers, and it has a new team of writers now. Probably almost everybody that's writing for The Onion now didn't write for The Onion 25 years ago. And it's the same thing with what we're doing. You know, we want it to outlast us. You look at most Christian comedy, and it's based around a person or a personality, and if that person were to have some crazy scandal or they stop doing it, it's like, it's done, it's dead. You know, but with the Babylon Bee, it's like we can outlast that, you know, and we can continue to provide, we can continue to speak truth to a post-truth culture, you know, in a way that, like, Adam Ford kind of isn't really that involved with the site anymore. Someday I won't be involved as much with the site anymore, and my successor won't be involved with the site anymore. But it's something that we can, I don't know, I'm really hoping that we can kind of create this movement of comedians that aren't afraid.
If it makes you feel any better, I didn't know your name until I knew the Babylon Bee. I read it all the time, but I didn't know the name Kyle Mann.
I kind of love to hear that, because I don't want it to be associated with me. I want to die and be forgotten. You know, I would love in 30 years for people to still know what the Babylon Bee is. Let us pray.
Yes. we should start with the prayer. Yeah.
Where's the altar call? An altar call. Very sad.